Lutheranism is one of the 5 main branches of the Protestant religion. Its beginnings came with Martin Luther in 1517, when he had some major differences with the Catholic Church, and publicly announced them by nailing his 95 Thesis to the Wittenberg church door. He wasn't trying to start a separate branch of religion. He was challenging some of the vile practices by those in authority within the church, but it was a bold move, and the Protestant Reformation was born out of it. Luther's followers called themselves evangelical, meaning centered on the gospel. It was his opponents who used the term Lutheran for his followers. Luther taught the 3 solas, grace alone, faith alone, Scripture alone, that salvation is by grace. Through faith alone is the hallmark of Luther's teaching, and ultimately what caused him to part with the Catholic Church. Hundreds of years of church history later, the first wave of Lutheran immigrants arrived in America in 1740, with settlements in New York, Pennsylvania, and the Carolinas. Lutherans are part of a unified organization called a synod, and in the U.S. there are 3 major synods, all having differing beliefs concerning biblical teachings. They are the Wisconsin Evangelical Synod, the most conservative branch, the Missouri Synod, and then the more liberal ELCA Synod. While Lutherans do have some differing views from other branches of the Protestant Church, they do not lean toward the cult side of religion. If one happens to use their faith as justification to commit murder, perhaps we should take a closer look at how they may have twisted those beliefs for their own purposes. Because we all know that all things are possible through Scripture out of context.
I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is Hard Times and True Crimes.
So I was going to ask what you're drinking, but since we are recording 2 in one day,
episode.
But we're still drinking the coffees that we had on last week's episode.
Yeah, from Dunkin', and they're
Yes,
good.
They are good. Well, I'm going to jump right into this episode, and I believe you have heard this one before, but maybe I can share something in there that you haven't heard.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story.
It really is. John Email List, that sounded like I said email. John Email List was born September 17th, 1925 in Bay City, Michigan, the only child of devout Lutheran parents. He grew up to become a devout Lutheran as well, even serving at times as a Sunday school teacher. Being an only child, he was the apple of his mother's eye, and the 2 were very close. Some did perceive her as maybe even being somewhat controlling at times.
Okay.
And maybe that plays a part in this or not. I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. So that's
okay, so
makes a little bit of sense there. Yeah.
Keep that in the back of your mind. So John was in the Army during World War II. He served. And when he was released from service after the war, he attended university where he acquired a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's degree in accounting. He was good with figures, but as you will soon hear, he was not great at money management of his own personal finances.
Okay.
In the early 1950s, he was recalled to service during the Korean War. And at Fort Eustis in Virginia, he met Helen Taylor, the young widow of an infantry officer who had been killed in action. And Helen had a young daughter by her first husband, whom they had named Brenda.
Okay.
Soon after they began dating, Helen informed John that she was expecting a baby. And being a devout Christian, that pregnancy outside of marriage obviously was against their teachings of their church and of the Bible. And so he made plans to wed her very quickly.
Did he want to? Like, was he in love with her?
I don't know if he was ready to yet.
Okay.
But that did put him on the track of, we're going to do this now. And so they were married in 1951.
Okay.
However, it wasn't long after the vows were made that Helen actually confessed to John that she was not really pregnant. she had actually lied to him.
Ooh.
I know, like,
Yikes.
entrapment. It reminds me, like, back in the 80s, if you ever watched soap operas, like, that was a thing. Like, there was always a storyline where somebody lied about being pregnant to get somebody to entrap somebody into marrying them.
There's always a girl in high school, too.
Always. I'm glad you said it because that's what I was thinking. I bet we all know somebody who really did that. Okay, well, now we know that Helen really did that as well. So, nonetheless, the vows had been made, so he did stay with Helen despite the deception. I mean, that's a pretty big deception.
That is.
And it wasn't long before she actually did become pregnant.
Okay.
They had their first child, Patricia. Shortly after that, they had their second child, a son named John Jr., and then a couple years later, they had little Frederick. Mm-hmm. And so within a 4-year span, they had 3 children.
And then she had a daughter.
And she had an older daughter. And I know what it's like having all those little children at once because I did have 3 within 3 years.
Yes.
Life is a zoo during that time.
Mm-hmm.
John did have some trouble keeping a good job. He was able to acquire good jobs, but somehow he always ended up losing them. Some people said it was due to his lack of social skills.
Okay.
But he finally did land a great job as the vice president of a bank in Westfield, New Jersey.
Oh, wow.
That was in 1965. So the family moved from Michigan to take the job. And it was here that John bought Helen her dream home. It was a 19-room Victorian mansion.
Wow.
And it was like the biggest.
Wow.
I know.
19.
Can you imagine?
Okay. Yeah.
It was the biggest house in one of the nicest areas of town. And their house even had a name. Breeze Knoll.
Oh.
Isn't that cool?
Fancy.
Yeah. Years ago when my house was like a zoo and I had 3 toddlers running around and 2 teenagers at home, I joked one time that I wanted to name our house, we had just built our house, and I'm like, I want to name our house Gwyn Haven. It's like our place of peace. And my teenager at the time said, who are you kidding, Mom? It should be called Gwyn Asylum.
That is hilarious.
And I like, well, okay.
You got a point.
Realistically, you're right. So we're not naming our house Gwyn Asylum. So my house did not get a name. All right. Well, even with this new, really, really good job, the List family, they actually could not afford that house. Mm. So John's mother loaned him the money to buy it with the understanding that she would live on the 3rd floor in her own suite. Okay. So again, you see Mom kind of in there. Yeah.
Did they want her to be there?
Well, they wanted that house and the only way to get it. So I'm sure that they were willing to make that concession. Yes. And it seems like at that point, John definitely had a problem living beyond his means.
Okay.
And I don't know if he was just trying to appear more well off than he actually was, or if he just wanted the nicer things in life, but he's, spending money he doesn't really have. Unfortunately, within a year, he lost his vice president bank job.
Oh my gosh.
Most of the reports I read, and even some of the other podcasts, said that it was because of his social skills. Mm-hmm. But actually, when I went back and read newspaper reports, they said that he was laid off due to closure of the bank.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I had always heard that too, that it was because of social skills.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Ladies, I don't know about you, but over the last few years, Melody and I have noticed differences in our skin that have been pretty discouraging. You know, the inevitable signs of aging, fine lines, some wrinkles here and there, dull, dry skin, and sunspots. Thankfully, there's a non-invasive treatment available without having to go under the knife. Tasha Briles at Lakeside Integrative in High Point, North Carolina, offers a total skin package that includes radiofrequency microneedling and laser skin resurfacing that can be done right in her office in under an hour. It stimulates collagen growth and elastin that improves the surface and texture of your skin, as well as tightening it. The laser treats acne scars, minimizes large pores, and lessens, if not completely fades, sunspots. Melody and I were blessed to get this treatment in late fall. We're going back for our after photos within a couple of weeks, and we'll be sure to post them on our Facebook group. Melody was just saying how she felt like it gave her a fresh start for her skin routine. It even cleared up some precancerous skin lesions she had, and it faded my sunspots completely as well as brightened and tightened my skin. We're really thrilled with our results. Lakeside Integrative offers an array of other services for men and women, as well as fillers, laser hair removal, weight loss, hormone, and medical treatments. Don't walk, run to the phone and call Lakeside Integrative to set up your appointment at 336-715-0007. Tell them Darlene and Melody from Hard Times and True Crime sent you.
So John was too ashamed to tell his family that he was no longer employed, so he actually continued to keep up the appearance of going to work. So he would get up each morning, get dressed, have his coffee, get out the door, and then he would, when he left the house, he would like go to the local train station and just kind of hang out all day, watch.
Okay, that's dangerous. For whatever reason, people who do that, I feel like when they get found out, they do crazy things.
So that's a red flag for you?
Yes.
Okay, well,
there's people who, you think about it, kids who have pretended to like go to school and get these degrees and they end up killing their parents.
Right.
And,
yeah. I mean, it is a kind of a sign of like, okay, unhinged behavior maybe.
Yeah.
A
It's like come clean.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just.
So Helen obviously wasn't the only one with deceptive ways.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, he would just go to the train station, sit there all day until time to return home from work. Sometimes while he was there, he would read the paper and look for other jobs. And other times he just did nothing.
That's just weird.
He just passed the time. It was.
Well, how the heck were they getting by?
Well, his mother lived with him, and she had her own savings account. She had over $200,000 at that time. And so he was siphoning money out of her account.
Oh, my gosh.
To cover his financial issues.
I'm nervous to find out how much.
Well, I'm going to tell you in just a few minutes. Some sources assert that he had great pressure on him from his church and his religious affiliation with the Lutherans because he was supposed to be the provider of the family.
Oh, poot.
I know. And they were, I read several things that said they didn't believe in living in poverty, like poverty was a sin. I've never known the Lutheran Church to preach that poverty was a sin.
No.
Nor that, like, they said he couldn't accept welfare because it would be against the church. I think it might have been against his pride.
Yeah,
but I don't
that's
think it was
just
against
silliness.
His church.
His church don't teach him to lie to his wife and to go to the train station and sit all day. And I mean, that's dumb. That's just trying to blame religion. Yeah,
and see, I wasn't even able to find anything in the Lutheran beliefs that confirmed any of that. I don't know a lot about Lutherans, but I do. I have been to a Lutheran church a few times. I know I have friends that are Lutherans, and I have never heard of any weird stuff like that.
No.
I think they are a mainstream Protestant religion.
Yeah.
That teaches pretty much the Bible.
Right.
So I do feel like it was pure and simple pride on his part.
Yes.
But I did find it so weird that, here you have this guy who has a degree in business management and accounting, and he keeps making such poor financial decisions. I'm like, what's up with that? I just think it's weird. I mean, didn't you take an economics class?
Right. Especially when like you said, he works in finances.
It's weird. But things were getting tough. And since he's not bringing in a paycheck, like we just talked about, he's taking this money out of his mom's account, unbeknownst to her. And he's using it to pay his mortgage and expenses while he doesn't have a job. And it had probably actually been going on a long time before even that. But he can't keep up that charade forever. And he knows he's going to get caught because he had almost gone completely through the whole amount by this time.
Oh my gracious.
So while he was under great financial strain during this time, he had other concerns. He was under a lot of stress because his children had now become teenagers and they were acting like teenagers, doing some things that he felt were worldly, for instance. And it's not something that we would probably find problematic.
Right.
But, like his daughter, Patricia, wanted to be an actress. And he felt like that was a worldly profession and he wanted to keep her from that.
Okay. But lying's not worldly, right?
Right. And exactly.
And
but
stealing from your mama.
Yeah. So he just felt like, okay, my family, they're getting worldly. Things are getting out of control. I can't keep up with my lifestyle. He's starting to feel that pressure. And then there's his wife, Helen. She had developed some severe health problems as well as alcoholism. Now, talk about her deception. You know, she lied about that pregnancy.
Yeah.
Well, she also had, this wasn't per se a lie, but she'd been hiding another secret that she had.
Okay.
She had actually contracted syphilis from her first husband.
Oh, gracious.
And had not told John about it. And you know, that's like an STD.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, well, how would he not know? Wouldn't he have gotten it?
I mean, yeah.
Well, I'm going to tell you.
Isn't that like a deadly thing if it goes untreated?
Yes.
That's what I was thinking. It'll
Yeah.
make you go nuts, won't it?
And I was thinking, how could he have not known?
Yeah.
But this was tertiary syphilis. I don't know if I'm saying that right. So basically what that meant is in the early stages of it, when she first had symptoms, it would have been very contagious, but eventually it went dormant in her body and was no longer contagious. So that's how she was probably able to hide it from him.
Okay.
But in the meantime, it's in her body causing havoc and she doesn't know it.
Oh, so she probably is actually going nuts. Is she going nuts?
She's getting really sick and she's an alcoholic now and she's got some really bad health problems.
And she didn't realize she had syphilis.
Oh, she did.
Oh, she knew she had.
She knew.
Okay.
She
just didn't want him to know.
She didn't tell it, yeah. And so she was already getting embarrassed by all her health problems it was causing her. So she had stopped attending church with him and that was concerning him. He didn't like that his wife wasn't going to church. And at one point he mentioned to someone else that she was an insufferable nag.
Sounds like they just did not have very good communication in their marriage.
Right. They probably didn't get any marriage counseling either, it doesn't sound like. You know, all these things are piling up in John's mind. It was just too much for him to handle. You know, he's facing possible bankruptcy, no job, wife has syphilis, kids are getting out in the world, and his mom's probably getting ready to find out she has no savings left.
Okay, so does he realize at this point that his wife has syphilis, or he still doesn't know?
Yeah, he knows now.
Oh, he knows now.
He's found out that that's the cause of her health problems and why she's not coming to church. And so, yeah, he's probably not real happy about that.
I mean, but in her defense, she was married. She got it from her husband.
Yeah.
I mean, she should have told him, but I mean, it's not like she could.
Yeah, and her husband probably picked it up while he was out fighting in the war and going to brothels or whatever. I mean, you know,
It happens.
He was starting to become really concerned that his family was they're all just going to hell. So, over the course of several months, John meticulously formed a plan that's going to take care of all his problems at once. He went to a shooting range and brushed up on his shooting skills. And then one evening at dinner, he actually asked his family, what would they want done with their bodies should they die? Like, do you want to be buried, cremated? What do you want done? Then, on the morning of November 9th, 1971, after the kids left for school, he loaded his handguns and went into the kitchen. Helen was there having her first cup of coffee for the day. I imagine they chatted about their morning and what their plans were for the day. But when she turned her back, he fired the gun and shot her in the head. He proceeded to put her on a sleeping bag and drug her into the large, elegant ballroom and left her laying in there. He then walked upstairs to the third floor where his mother was, and he shot his 84-year-old mother, Alma, in the back of the head.
Okay.
Now, he tried to drag her down to the ballroom as well and put her with Helen, but she was too heavy, so he stuffed her body in an upstairs closet.
Oh, my gosh. What a monster.
Right?
There is something wrong with this
Something
guy.
wrong, and it's not his religious beliefs.
No, it's not.
So he went downstairs. He cleaned up the blood from Helen's murder so the kids wouldn't stumble across it when they came in from school. He continued with his plan of covering his steps. He sat down and wrote letters to the kids' school, informing them that the family would be traveling to North Carolina for a visit to his wife's mother for a family emergency, and so they wouldn't be at school for a while. He didn't know when they would return. He took those to the post office to mail, and while he was there, he had his mail put on hold, and he went and had his milk delivery stopped. You know, back then they had their milk come in bottles. You probably don't remember that.
I don't, but
I actually do.
Really?
Yeah. Then he went to the bank where he took out the last $2,000 in his mother's savings.
what?
Yes, the
He
last.
had cleaned her
Cleaned her
out.
out. And he returned home in time for lunch. Ate
Please
lunch.
tell me he didn't eat. Oh my god.
He did. He sat down and ate while he waited for the kids to get home
What
from
a
school.
sicko.
I know.
Why do they murder people and then sit down and eat
I
these
don't get-
big meals?
I don't understand. Like, what? You just all of us. How would you have an appetite?
That is
I don't know. While he was waiting, though, for school to end for the day, Patricia actually got sick at school. So she called home and needed a ride home early. So he went and got her, and when they got home, while her back was turned, he shot her from behind and dragged her body into the ballroom with her mother. Next, the youngest son, 13-year-old Frederick, arrived home. And you know what happened. John shot him from behind and added his body to the ballroom with Helen's and Patricia's. John Jr., the 16-year-old, had a soccer game after school. John went to the game and cheered his son on. Afterward, they returned home, where his father shot him in the back of the head. And he struggled a little bit, and so he ended up shooting his son 10 times.
Huh?
To be sure that he was dead. I don't know if he fought back or if he just didn't seem to be dying right away and was maybe gasping for air, but he did shoot him 10 times. And so he dragged him into the ballroom with the others, and they all lay there in a row, head to toe, on sleeping bags. Now his whole family had been annihilated. All the bodies were in the ballroom together except for his mother, and he stood over his family and recited a prayer. He then drafted a 5-page letter to his pastor with his confession of the murders. And in this confession, this is what he explained, that it had not been easy to kill his family, but he did it because of money problems and their ebbing devotion to Christianity. So he says that was his motive, that he was worried about their souls.
I do not believe that for a second.
Here's a portion of the letter that he wrote to his pastor.
Dear Pastor Rewinkle, I'm very sorry to add this additional burden to your work. I know that what has been done is wrong from all that I have been taught, and that any reasons will not make it right. But you are the one person I know that, while not condoning this, will at least possibly understand why I felt I had to do this. I wasn't earning anywhere near enough to support us. Everything I tried seemed to fall into pieces. True, we could have gone bankrupt or maybe gone on welfare, but that brings me to my next point. Knowing the type of location that one would have to live in, plus the environment for the children, plus the effect on them knowing that they were on welfare, was just more than I thought they could and should endure. And with Pat being so determined to get into acting, I was fearful what that might do to her continuing to be a Christian. Also, with Helen not going to church, I know this would harm the children eventually in their attendance. If any one of these had been one condition, we might have pulled through, but this was just too much. I'm certain that all have gone to heaven by now. Mother got involved because doing what I did to my family would have been a tremendous shock to her at this age. Therefore, knowing that she is also a Christian, I felt it best that she be relieved of the troubles of this world. After it was all over, I said some prayers for them, all from the hymn book. That was the least that I could do. Originally, I'd planned this for November 1st, All Saints' Day, but travel arrangements were delayed. I thought it would be an appropriate day for them to go to heaven. Also, I'm sure many will say, how could anyone do such a horrible thing? My only answer is it isn't easy and was only done after much thought. It may seem cowardly to have always shot from behind, but I didn't want any of them to know, even at the last second, what I had done to them. John got hurt more because he seemed to struggle longer. The rest were immediately out of any pain. John didn't consciously feel anything either. Please remember me in your prayers. I will need them whether or not the government does its duty as it seems it should. I'm only concerned with making my peace with God, and of this I'm assured because of Christ dying even for me. P.S. Mother is in the hallway in the attic, 3rd floor. She was too heavy to carry.
Oh, that is just weird.
Yeah, that's just creepy.
What about he needs to worry about his soul.
I know. I was trying to think of the word, like, you're not even considering what you're doing. but you're worried about them?
And he's just putting all the blame. It's always like everybody else. Like his wife is a nag and his kids are doing this and
all of this.
He's a victim.
Mm-hmm. After he finished cleaning the blood around the house, he had supper. So he's had 2 meals now.
Disgusting.
And
if he can kill his kids and then go eat.
I know. And then he went to bed. And then he later said he got the best night of sleep that night that he had had in years.
Okay. This guy, no, he is just pure evil.
Yeah, I got no words for him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I do have some words for him, but I'm not going to say them. I have no words to describe him.
Right.
The next morning, he got up and completed his final details to cover up the murders. He turned the AC down as far as it would go, down to 50 degrees, to make it as cold as possible in there. And that was so the bodies wouldn't deteriorate as fast and smell. He turned on every light in the house and dialed the radio to a religious station and played it over the intercom system throughout the house.
That sounds so scary to me.
I know. How creepy is that? Some described it as funeral music. Others said it was like classical, but I really imagined it being more similar to like, Christian music in the 60s and 70s was like hymnal music.
Yes.
Probably something you would hear like at a funeral type thing. Ugh. But it could possibly, he was Lutheran and they do sometimes do like the more of the Catholic sounding chant type music, like a Baroque sound. I even wondered if it was that. I don't know because every source had their own description of it, but suffice to say it was creepy.
Yes.
As I'll get out. So List had thought of everything. He actually went through the house and cut his image out of every family picture and then hung the pictures back up. Instead of just destroying them, he hung them back up with his face cut out so that they wouldn't have an image of him to show, to pass on the bulletin.
He never planned on killing himself.
He actually, he said he considered it, but he didn't, that was an unforgivable sin and he didn't want to go to hell.
Are you kidding?
That's what he said. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
So I guess murder's not unforgivable, but suicide is.
Okay.
Yeah. So a month went by before anybody got suspicious because nobody had missed the kids. They weren't expecting them at school. He doesn't have a job to show up at. Nobody's wondering where he is. So nobody's like wondering. And even the neighbors, like they're noticing the lights are on in the house and they can hear music coming from the house.
Yeah.
So they're not thinking anything of it. But eventually they did start thinking, well, it's kind of weird because now some of the lights were burning out.
Oh.
And then Patricia's acting teacher decided, she's not back yet. That is a little longer than I expected. I'm a little concerned. He thought, I'm going to go check. He went by their house to check because it turns out that Patricia had confided in him that she was worried that her father may kill the family.
Really?
Because he was unhappy with how life was going. And she had said to him, if I disappear or you don't hear from me for a while, he might have killed us.
Okay,
so he's obviously said, like, her dad must have said things
like
to them.
threaten the family.
Something. So the teacher went by the house and he began maybe like trying to look in the windows. And then the neighbors saw that and got suspicious and they called the cops. Obviously the cops got there and they could hear the music from outside. And they're like, okay, we need to go check out. So they're looking in the windows as well. And they see 4 bundles lying in a huge room with all the lights still burning. So they called their chief and then he gets there. And so they entered the house about 10:30 through a window. Officers found the house freezing cold. They heard that creepy music. And then they discovered that those bundles were indeed the bodies of those family members. In a decomposed state. Obviously not as far along as not in the heat of summer because it had been so cold in there, but they were decomposing after a month. And after searching the house further, they found John's confession letters that he had written to the pastor and what they assumed were the 2 murder weapons, a 9mm and a .22 caliber revolver. It's obviously the members of that family, but that one family member was conspicuously missing, and that was John. Mm-hmm. And so with that confession letter, John List is the prime suspect. So an APB was issued on him. But, he's had already a month to get out of there. He's got a head start. They did find his 1963 green Chevy Impala at the JFK airport. But when they tracked all the flights down, the trail grew cold because he had not taken any flights out of JFK. The FBI put out a circular that was signed by the then director, J. Edgar Hoover, and it described List as a neat dresser and said he might be armed and dangerous. The following August in 1972, Breeze Knoll, their mansion, caught fire and was completely destroyed. They suspected arson in that.
Oh, wow.
So that house is no longer there. Because I was going to say, you and Curtis, if y'all go to New Jersey, y'all should go look for it, but it's no longer there.
Were they thinking that he did it, or they don't?
No,
know?
actually, they said like a lot of, I don't want to say squatters, but like kids practicing possible witchcraft and stuff were hanging out there and like messing around. And
because so many people had died.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, they make it into a creepy place and let's
Right.
go here. Yeah. But what's interesting is it was also discovered after this fire that there was a glass skylight in that ballroom where the family members had been laid out. It was a Tiffany original, and it was valued at over $100,000 at the time. And today, that would be over $800,000.
Oh my gosh.
And that could have solved all of his money issues if he had only known. But he didn't realize the treasure that was sitting right under his nose, or I should say right over his head. But I thought about that, and I thought even if he had discovered that and gotten out of his money troubles, he would have been right back in them.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have done him any good. He would have gotten right back in those money troubles probably within a year or two.
Oh, yeah.
Because he obviously can't manage his funds.
Right. But you know what? There's a lot of people that can't manage their funds that aren't going to go murder their entire family.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, also in 1972, it was suspected that John List may be the man also known as D.B. Cooper. Have you ever heard of him? He was a fugitive wanted for hijacking an airplane.
Yes.
And it happened within just a few weeks of John List going
And they looked
missing.
kind of similar, didn't they?
They looked uncannily similar.
Yes.
And Cooper's body had never been found. So due to the timing of the plane being hijacked and John List going missing and the fact that they look so much alike, the FBI was seriously considering him as a possible suspect. But they don't find John List either. And 18 years go by and nothing has been seen of him until one evening in May of 1989. The killings were featured on an episode of America's Most Wanted with host John Walsh. I was a senior in high school getting ready to graduate, and I actually I remember this.
You do?
I do. Walsh had explained that in order to get John List featured on the program, he would need an updated image of him. Producers sought out a forensic sculptor named Frank Bender, no relation to the Bender family that we covered in episode 57, or at least none that we know of. And Bender had come up with an age-progressed clay bust of List. And they also used a forensic psychologist to get like this profile on him. And it's amazing how using that profile of how they thought he would act and how they thought he would look, they were able to put it together and provide that bust. So, for instance, they said he's probably going to wear the same style of glasses that he wore almost 20 years ago.
Isn't that crazy?
Because the personality profile guy said, just based on what they did know about him, that was when he was in his prime, and he's the kind of person that would want to stay living in his prime. And so they, used those type of glasses, and they said he wouldn't have moved on psychologically. And so they put this thing together. And this sculpture of his supposed likeness that they're totally guessing at was released in that episode. And I'm going to show you the picture.
Okay. That is so fascinating to me that they can come up with those profiles that are so stinking accurate.
So, yeah. The middle one is the bust, and the picture on the right is him.
My gosh. That is nuts.
And the picture on the left was him when he disappeared. That's the bust they thought he would look like, and that is what he actually looked like when they found him.
Wow.
How uncanny is that? And I will put this on the website.
Yes, they were spot on.
Spot on. I'm like, that is crazy how well they did that. Like,
That's
whatever the
just
science
weird.
is behind that, it
is
is accurate. Okay, there's this lady who calls the show, and she says, he looks just like my neighbor, Robert Clark, but the guy doesn't live here anymore. He was our neighbor for a while, and he moved to Virginia. She was in Denver, Colorado.
Okay.
And there was another call made from Virginia from somebody who said, that looks like my neighbor, Robert Clark. They took that very seriously. 11 days later, John List was arrested in Richmond, Virginia, living under the name of Robert or Bob Clark.
Gosh.
He, of course, denied being John List, but you know what? The fingerprints said otherwise.
Oh, yeah.
He was living there with his second wife, Dolores, and working at a Richmond accounting firm. He was now in his mid-60s. He was living a quiet life. He was a rather unremarkable guy, apparently still having financial troubles. He was making a $12,000 salary per year with 2 mortgages on his house equaling $40,000 at that time. And that's about $300,000 today.
Oh, my God.
But after being presented with more evidence that he couldn't really refute, he finally broke down and confessed that he was John List. And then the FBI also interviewed him about the D.B. Cooper air hijacking case. And he denied knowing anything about it. There was never really any evidence that would connect him to it. And at some point, the FBI did just cross him off of their suspect list.
Okay.
So some people still connect the two.
Yeah.
And who knows?
Could be.
But the FBI does say that they don't consider him a suspect. So after the murders, he had moved to Denver. And then he had met Dolores in 1977 at a church singles party. And they married. He continued to lose jobs and have money woes. And in February of 1988, he and Dolores moved from Denver to Richmond, Virginia for a job that he had gotten. And Dolores, she wasn't really crazy about leaving Colorado, but John had been out of work for most of their marriage. And so now he's got this job offer. She feels like, well, I need to follow him for this job.
Yeah.
Shortly after they had moved, she actually wrote back home to one of her friends and said she was having second thoughts about that move and that they were still having quite a few financial problems. And she just wasn't sure if that had been the right decision. After his arrest, Dolores told authorities there's no way her husband was a murderer. She couldn't believe it. She said he was a good, God-fearing man with a deep, abiding faith in God. Dolores had been told and believed that John had no children and that his previous wife had died of cancer.
Wow.
Yeah. So talk about deception.
Seriously.
But her former neighbor named Wanda Flannery from Colorado, who was the one who had called in the tip, she actually said at one point when they were in Colorado together, she had seen an article in a tabloid about the John List murders. And she thought that picture was a dead ringer for Bob Clark, Dolores' husband. So she took that magazine next door and she showed it to Dolores and said, "Do you think that's Bob?" And Dolores was like, "Oh, no, it couldn't be." And so Wanda dared her. She's like, "Well, show this to him and ask him if it's him."
Ah.
But Dolores never did. So
Really?
she probably didn't want to know the truth. You know she had to somewhere suspect something at that point. But she didn't want to know the truth, and so she never did. When Wanda Flannery was asked if she had any regrets about turning him in, because I think it was either her husband or her son, she told them and they called in that tip.
Yeah.
She said no, she had no regrets about reporting Bob because, in her opinion, she might have saved Dolores' life.
Yes.
Because if he had killed once, he could certainly do it again, especially since they were still having such financial problems.
Absolutely.
So she felt like, you know what, I might have just saved her life.
Yeah.
And she probably
probably did.
very well could have.
Especially because he got away with it and,
Right.
seemingly. So, he
Yeah,
probably
for
would've-
18 years.
Yeah.
John List was charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. Psychologists diagnosed him with OCD. One psychiatrist said his sense of neatness was a sign of a compulsive personality, but he showed no evidence of genuine remorse for his crimes.
That is bizarre. So
Bizarre.
there's something else besides OCD.
Something, and it's not just his religious beliefs by
No,
any
my
means.
gosh. That's just a cop-out.
I think it was his cop-out.
Yeah.
And not that I don't think that he wasn't worried about the souls of his children, but he was obviously not thinking clearly if he wasn't worried about his own soul because he's, stealing money from his mom and killing people.
Well, if he's OCD, he's probably he needs to feels a need to control everything, and he's probably losing control in every like your kids grow up.
Yes,
You can't control
and you
them.
can't control them.
And so that
Yes.
probably had a lot to do with that.
Yes, probably so. At his trial, he was found guilty after 9 hours of deliberation and given the maximum sentence of 5 consecutive life terms. So those are back to back and not concurrent.
Surprised he didn't get death.
I know. I feel like he should have.
Yeah.
John List died in prison on March 21st, 2008 at 82 years old due to complications from pneumonia. And that is the story of the Ballroom Murders.
My gosh. Those were some hard times.
They sure were.
All things are possible through Scripture out of context, like Matthew 7:12, which says, "Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law." And since you want me to bring you new episodes of Hard Times and True Crimes, it's technically your biblical obligation to tell everybody you know, and a few people you don't, to check us out. Till next time, goodbye.